Record. All right, so we are recording now. So now I can go talk about your exam. So here we go. So a couple of things about your exam, a couple of important updates. Number one, it's going to be given on the 21st of May at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Can you guys see the PowerPoint now?
No.
No. Okay. See.
No.
Okay. So let's try this again. Thank you for telling me. All right. So we're going to go to share our screen.
Wait, Mr. Ehlers,
Yes.
if it's at 2 o'clock, so that means we're definitely doing it at home?
I'm going to explain all that. Okay. From
All right.
here we go. Okay. Can you guys see it now? Yes. Okay, great.
Yes.
So
Yes, sir.
It is May the 21st. It is at 2 p.m. Now, the question that was just asked was, does that mean we're definitely doing it at home? Okay, if we happen to be back in school on May 21st, and I have my fingers crossed that we will be, because I don't know if I'm going to last another month with this. So God willing, we will be back at school then. You will take it at school if we are back in school. If we're still out of school, you will take it at home. Okay, so it's really kind of up in the air. But it is a week later, and it has shifted to the afternoon. Now, it's only a 45-minute exam. Okay, that part we knew already. And I'll explain what that's going to look like right now. Here's what we found out last night. Okay, it is a DBQ. It's going to be a DBQ question, but instead of 7 documents, because you only have 45 minutes, it's going to be 5 documents instead of 7. We also found out last night that there is a new rubric, and it's going to be coming out today. And as soon as I get it, they said around midday today. So I would assume within the next couple of hours, it will be posted. As soon as I get it, I will post it on the Teams page, and I'll probably also send it out on the Remind, so you have it in both places, okay? I don't know what that rubric is going to look like yet. I would assume it's going to be a simpler rubric. If I had to guess, I would guess that they're definitely going to be taking the complexity point out, and probably one other point as well. I don't know what that would be. I would say thesis is still going to be on there. I would say contextualization is probably still going to be on there. And I would say argument development for sure will still be on there. They may change around what they do with sourcing. And I would bet that the complexity point would get taken out. But again, I don't know that for certain yet. We'll find out today, sometime this afternoon, and I'll post that for you. Okay? You can complete the test either on your computer, on a laptop, or on your phone. Now, what that means is that you have the option, if you're doing it, say, on a phone, you have the option to handwrite your response and then upload a photo. So you could take a picture of your answer and then upload it. Or if you're doing it on a computer and you want to type it, you have that option as well. Okay, so you have either option. Here's the kicker though, and here's what's going to be important and what we're going to have to kind of practice with. You must press submit, and you must have your answer submitted before the end of the 45 minutes, or you won't receive any credit at all. So like if you're still typing and that timer runs out and you haven't clicked the submit button, they're not going to let you upload it late, even if it's like a second or two. Okay, so really what you need to be thinking about is you need to really think about how you're probably only going to have about 42 to 43 minutes at most to write and to do this response. And that's simply because, you know, we don't know what the process for uploading stuff is going to look like yet. We don't know if it's going to take a long time for the document to upload, but you don't want to wait till like the last 10 seconds to click submit, because we just don't know what that's going to look like. Now, what they have said is that there is going to be a timer up on the screen. So you will know exactly how much time you have left. Okay, so there will be a timer for you to kind of follow along and keep time with. And then The other thing that they said is there's going to be multiple questions floating around, okay? So you may get a different DBQ question than somebody else in this class, okay? They have a bank of like 6 or 7 questions that they're using, and whichever one you get is going to be completely random, okay? So you won't know which one you're going to get until you log in that day at 2 o'clock. So that's a bit of important information about that, okay? They're also going to be putting up a practice with the system so that you can see what it's going to look like on the computer, so you can practice typing in the box, or you can practice uploading and seeing how that works if you think that you're going to go the route of handwriting and then taking a picture. They are going to put up a practice within the next week or two so that you will have that opportunity. And again, once that's available to you, I will post that so that you can kind of check that out, because you definitely want to make use of the practice. You don't want the first time that you're seeing what this system looks like to be the afternoon of your exam. So I would absolutely take advantage of that practice, okay? All right, so before we move on and before we go into any kind of a lesson for today, I want to pause for a minute or two now, and if you have any questions about the exam that you want to ask, you can go ahead, unmute your mic now, and you can go ahead and ask them. And then in a couple minutes, we'll go on to the regular lesson for today. So does anybody have any questions they want to ask?
Can we call you and then ask for answers?
You cannot. No, there is still an element of testing security here. Okay, and they have said that your responses are still going to be run through plagiarism software. They will still be compared to other people's to make sure that your answers are not similar. Now, it is open book and it is open notes, obviously. But
open notes, you said?
Yes.
Oh my God! Oh my
I'm blessed.
What a
Amen! Amen!
But
this is not fair. How are we going to separate the average from the above average?
well, so remember that you only have 45 minutes, which means if you're spending all that time looking up information, you're not going to have time to write a decent essay. Okay.
Okay, but can they just do open note multiple choice?
Open notebook.
For
But
real, I'm
again,
with Matthew.
keep in mind that like if you're spending 30 of the 45 minutes reading and looking up information, that's only going to give you 15 minutes to write. So there, you know, you still do kind of have to have some kind of knowledge. Now, I obviously don't know anything about questions that they're going to ask, and then Chloe, I'll get to you in just a second. But if I had to guess, okay, I would guess that it's going to be a topic that's going to be kind of broad and is going to go across multiple periods. Now, I could be totally wrong, but my guess would be that it's going to be something like a DBQ about how trade has changed over time, or a DBQ about how state building has changed over time. Okay, this is just my guess, given that it's only a single question and they're still trying to test your knowledge of most of the course. My guess would be that it's going to be a very broad question. And yes, Kayla's absolutely right. When in doubt, just go with a trade route. So that is just a guess. Okay, you know, for all I know, they could shock me and they could ask you a very, very specific question about pirates or something. Okay, I just don't know. Okay, but I would guess that it's going to be a broad topic that's going to go across multiple eras. Okay, all right, Chloe, go ahead.
If we do go back to school May 1st, we still have to take the exam on computers, or would we?
Yes, if we do go back to school in May, you will still take the test on a computer. You'll just take it at school. So no matter what, it's going to be computer based. Okay, no matter what. Other questions about the exam? And like I said, I'll be posting detailed information on the Teams page. Jarlenis, to answer the question that you just asked in the chat, which is what if the program shuts down because everybody is on at the same time? That's a great question. That is something that they have to deal with on their end. Okay, I don't know anything about their servers or their technical issues. I would assume, you know, they know how many students are in AP World History. They know how many students are going to be taking the test that day. I would assume that they have some kind of a mechanism in place for those, you know, so that they know that if there's 75,000 students pressing submit around the same time, that it goes through. Is anybody in here, interestingly enough, is anybody in here taking an AP language exam, like Spanish? Okay, so what I found out about those tests last night, those are there is no reading and there is no writing. It is a speaking only exam.
No, that's the first part.
It is
Oh my God.
sorry, Jan. It is
Oh my God.
only exam where you'll have to record yourself answering questions, I guess on the telephone or something. But it is a speaking only exam.
That's the part I suck at.
What?
That's the part I suck at.
Well, you better, I don't know, get working. None of you guys are in AP Lang or AP Lit yet. Nobody's in calculus yet, right? No, that's juniors.
Olivia's in calculus.
Oh, is she in the chat? No, she's.
I don't know.
Okay, so that's what I found out about exams. Again, I'll post detailed information up on the page. I know, right, Matthew? Jan, Matthew said, imagine being Hispanic and you can't actually speak Spanish.
No, I can speak it. It's just the questions they ask. I mean, the scenarios they give you are so dumb. Like,
Oh, well,
you have to like talk about inviting someone to a party, and then you run out of things to say after like 20 seconds.
And how long do you have to speak for?
It's like 2 minutes.
Oh. Sorry. I don't know what to tell you. So again, I'll be posting detailed information on the Teams page and on Remind as soon as I get it, okay, so that you have it, okay? All right, so any other questions about exams before we move into today's lesson? Anybody else? Yes, Karina, go ahead.
So when is the practice thing gonna be open so we can work?
They said within the next week or so, okay? And so as soon as I find out that it's open, I will let everybody know, and then you can go check it out. Lexi, I just saw what you asked in the chat. I don't know anything about AP Music, okay? If I do find out, or when I find out, I'll be sure to let you know, okay?
Mr. Ehlers,
Yes, Kayla.
I don't have a question about the exam, but are you wearing your Notre Dame shirt, the green one?
I am, yes, which is why my head is kind of on the screen. That's why I look like nearly headless Nick today.
It looks pretty cool.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? I will try to get you all of the information on all of the AP exams as soon as I get it, because I don't know if any of your other teachers are doing this. So once I find out information about AP Psych, AP Music Theory, Olivia, I will try to find out about AP Calc. I will try to get all of that information to you, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and let's move on. And today, yeah, Chem 2, yes. Anything that I find out about any exam, I will get to you as soon as I can, as soon as I have it, which should be later today. So I can post information about it later this afternoon. All right, so today we're going to shift focus a little bit, and we're going to talk about what was happening within Europe during this time period. Okay, we've spoken for the last couple days. First, we spoke about what happened in Southeast Asia, in China, And then yesterday we focused about what happened kind of in Western Asia with the Muslims on Wednesday. So today we're going to shift up to the northwest a bit, and we're going to talk about what happened within Europe. Okay, and so there's three things for this part of the unit that you should be able to do, or should be able to explain rather, at the end of this. First is how the beliefs and the practices of the predominant religions within Europe affected European society. What were the causes and the consequences of the political decentralization within Europe? And finally, what were the effects of agriculture in Europe during this time period? So we're really going to shift focus today over to Europe. Okay, and I would say the big thing that you need to think about and to realize as we begin with this today is the idea that Europe is going to be far, far behind Asia. Okay, and so things we're going to be talking about Europe, you're going to be like, oh, they're like only doing that. And yes, okay, this is why this time period is often referred to as the Dark Ages. Okay, because when it comes to Europe, they are very, very much behind. Okay, and then even for a good portion of this time period, ironically enough, they are dealing with a global pandemic. Okay, that's going to kill about half of the European population. So this is a map of the Roman Empire. Okay, the reddish color represents.
I have a question.
Yes, Karina.
If it was a global pandemic, why didn't it kill anyone else?
Well, no, it did actually. Okay, about 3/4 of the world population ends up dying, including about half of Europe's population. So it does. Although I probably misspoke there, and I shouldn't have called it a global pandemic because it didn't affect Africa and it didn't affect North and South America. And the reason it didn't affect North and South America is because the Europeans had no idea that that place even existed at this point in time. So they weren't trading or anything with them. And then with regards to Africa, you know, we just don't know actually why the plague didn't make it into the African interior. It does make it onto the African coast, okay, because that's where most of the trading takes place. But it never really penetrated into the African interior, okay, probably because there was far less contact between Asians and Europeans with the interior. Most of their trade and most of their contact with Africa was taking place along the coast. But again, in terms of North and South America and in terms of Australia, there was no plague in those places simply because the Europeans and the Asians didn't know that those places even existed. And then obviously Antarctica, okay, there weren't any outbreaks of the plague. But anyway, if you look at this map, hey, this represents what the world looked like after the Roman Empire fell. And so what happens is after the Roman Empire falls, as a way for a lot of them to try to like keep it going, they tried to split the empire in half into an Eastern Roman Empire and a Western Roman Empire. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire actually does quite well. Okay, they later become the Byzantine Empire. So that like sort of orange color on this map, that's going to become the Byzantines. The Western Roman Empire, which again is where Rome is, okay, the Western Roman Empire actually is not doing that well. Okay, and that's the one that's going to really begin to split apart and become extremely destabilized. Okay, and so if you look then at this map, okay, now we're looking specifically at Europe. And what you can see here is that when the Roman Empire falls, and then eventually when the Western Roman Empire falls, Europe becomes extremely fragmented politically. Okay, it becomes very decentralized. What does that mean? It means that if you look at the map here, you can see you have all these different completely independent kingdoms. You've got the Franks, which are going to be the largest one. Okay, you've got the Ostrogoths, you've got the Visigoths, Okay, if you go into what is now modern day England, okay, you've got the Saxons and the Anglos and the Britons and the Scots up north. Okay, and so what happens is Europe becomes very decentralized. There is no unifying authority. There's no one king. Everybody becomes very, very loyal to their local leaders. Okay, and so that's what happens in Western Europe during what would come to be called the Dark Ages. Okay, this is where serfdom comes in. This is where feudalism comes in. Okay, and it very much replaces any kind of centralized authority. Okay, serfdom becomes the preferred form of labor, so there is not slavery on any large extent within Western Europe, but they do use serfdom extensively, and that's barely like a step above slavery. Okay, and then the other important thing here is that without a central authority to kind of oversee everything, infrastructure begins to fall apart. What does that mean? It means that there's no more roads, okay? Rome, as you know, was very, very famous for its extensive network of roads and transportation. All of that begins to fall apart during the Dark Ages. And so as a result, trade, unfortunately, becomes very, very localized, and it becomes that long distance trade ceases to happen. And it doesn't start back up again until the Chinese begin bringing goods from the Far East. So until the Silk Roads really start to kick in a little bit later on, about 600 years later, during this period of this, this Dark Ages period, you're not really going to see any kind of long distance trade. It's really just going to be extremely localized. Okay. The other thing that becomes very important during this time period is that you see a move towards Christianity, okay, becoming a very widely accepted religion within Rome. Okay, the western part of the Roman Empire does eventually become Christian, but it doesn't happen immediately. It's still a gradual change. Okay, so it's not like the Roman Empire falls and boom, all of a sudden all of Western Europe's Christian. This is still a very gradual change and still a very slow move towards Roman Catholicism. Okay, so there is still a pope, and one of the reasons I think that it happens so slowly is because it's very rural. Whereas the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, they have a lot of large cities, and it's a lot more urban. Whereas the western part of the old Roman Empire, it's very rural, it's very agricultural. Things are much more spread out. And so the changes that we're going to be talking about today happen extremely gradually. Okay, and it kind of emerges very, very slowly until we get to a period called the Renaissance, when all of a sudden Western Europe just kind of explodes onto the scene and becomes extremely significant. Okay, and so if you take a look at this map here showing some of the world trade routes, you will notice, look at Western Europe. Okay, so look up in the northwest part of the map there over here. You'll see there are very few international trade routes that are making their way into Western Europe. In fact, if you look, you'll notice like even North Africa is more connected to world trade than is Western Europe. Okay, this is again another reason why Europe stays kind of on the outside in terms of global society at the time, and why it takes them so long to kind of emerge. Okay, but you'll see over here we've got the Muslim Empire, and then if we go further east, we've got the Chinese Empire, and you can start to see the beginnings of the Silk Roads over here. Okay, it takes a while for world trade to get all the way to Western Europe. So this is again another reason why Western Europe is kind of on the fringes, is kind of on the outside of everything at this time period. So it's yet another reason why we refer to this often as the Dark Ages. Okay. All right. And so here we go. So what is it about medieval Europe? Okay, specifically during this period of time from 500 to 900 during the Common Era. Okay, the most politically significant empire at this time is going to be France. England comes a little bit later. Okay, but it's going to mostly be France in terms of being the most powerful. But basically, you have a lot of these small, very weak, extremely independent states who are only participating in subsistence farming, which means that they're only growing enough for themselves. There's no real agricultural economy here. There's no trade taking place. Okay, everything is very much localized and very much centralized, which means that there's not a lot of intellectual activity taking place. These people are pretty much focused on growing enough grain for themselves to just kind of make it. Okay, they're not really thinking about growing enough food that they can sell and make a profit. All they're trying to do is get by and not starve to death. Okay, they're also dealing constantly with these invasions from the Vikings. That is a constant threat as well. Okay, and all of that changes at least a little bit when we get to around the year 700, when we get to this guy, Charlemagne. Okay, Charlemagne is the ruler of the Frankish kingdom. Okay, so think about modern day Germany. Okay, and he is one of the first kings to sort of unite a great deal of territory under his order. Okay, his ultimate goal was to recreate the Roman Empire. Now, he does fail in that, but he's successful in doing a lot of other things. He wants to see a return to intellectualism, and he's very successful at that. He builds a lot of schools. Okay, he was a patron of the art, but his ultimate goal was to return things to the Roman Empire. And while he was not successful with that, he was successful in making his kingdom, he was successful in making it extremely Catholic and very Christian. Okay, and he did pledge his allegiance to the Pope. Okay, nevertheless, though, you are still seeing a very decentralized society, meaning you still have all these small independent states who are constantly competing with each other. And so you have all these kind of local lords who are constantly, engaging in these small wars with each other, okay? Because they're trying to take territory from someone, and they're involved in like a lot of these local competitions, okay? I wouldn't call them wars, but there was definitely fighting involved because these people were all loyal to their lord as opposed to being loyal to some kind of a king, okay? Also during this time period, you see the Pope, and more specifically, the Catholic Church becoming extremely important. Okay, and one of the main reasons for that is because religion provided people with something to hope for. It gave them, hope of a better life. It taught them that there was more than just this, and that's important for these people because again, they don't really have much during this time period. Okay, their lives are pretty bad, for lack of a better term. They're not sure where their next meal is coming from. It's a very dangerous time, and so religion, in this case Christianity, provides stability to them in a very unstable world. Okay. And the church, the Catholic Church, uses this to its advantage. And they set up this sort of very hierarchical structure. You have the Pope at the top. Underneath him, you have the bishops. Then you have the priests working underneath them. That hierarchy is extremely Roman, okay, and is again modeled after the Roman Empire. And much of what the church does during this time, including, by the way, speaking Latin, is all designed as a way to kind of shift people and to try to recreate Rome, which they were ultimately never able to do. Okay, and so if you think about the Dark Ages and you think about the Middle Ages, realize that the whole time during this period, their goal was to go back to what life was like in ancient Rome. That's what they constantly wanted to do. And that's a goal that's not really realized until the Renaissance, okay? But they were again, constantly trying to recreate and to go back to what life was like in ancient Rome, because everybody was doing very well then. Everybody was making money. They were protected, okay? It was a much simpler, much stabler time, okay? And so the church, though, is trying to convert people, okay? And they're trying to bring people into this new religion, or this newish religion. And so they realize that they have to kind of adapt a little bit. So they do, to some extent, allow certain pagan rituals to sort of eke their way into Christianity. Okay, for example, Christmas. As many of you may or may not know, yes, Christmas is the birth of Jesus Christ, but the celebration of Christmas actually started out as a pagan winter festival, okay, kind of like a pagan harvest festival. So that was something that they allowed in, okay? And then obviously, you know, what we celebrate around Christmas has since changed. And they are extremely successful, enough so that by the year 1100, most of Europe at this point is now Christian. So we can say Christianity has in fact spread at this point into most of Western Europe. Okay, and most of the Western European leaders during this time period, they not only provide protection for the Pope, but they also are very strong proponents of the faith. Okay, and in exchange for this, the church offers a lot of legitimacy for those people that have power. So the deal kind of is, if you support us, we will support you. And so these rulers agree to support the church, and then in exchange for that, the church tells all of its people, this is your leader, you need to follow this person. And these people were very willing to listen to the popes and to the bishops because of their status as being religious leaders, okay? And then again, of course, you know, we can't underestimate the idea that these medieval rulers wanted connections to the church because that provided them connections to Rome, okay? And so it was all about, again, trying to set up these ties and trying to set up these connections to Rome, okay? And so if you look at this map now, the darker colors, okay, so the darker orange color, like this color right here, that represents how far Christianity had spread by the year 300. The lighter orange color, which as you can see occupies a much greater portion of the map, shows how far Christianity had spread just 300 years later by the year 600, okay? So, you know, it is a pretty quick shift eventually. Once it happens, this shift happens quickly. And also keep in mind, this is before the Protestant Reformation, which means all these people are Roman Catholic. Now, over here in the East, we're only a couple hundred years away from that schism that's going to split the Eastern Catholic Church and the Western Catholic Church, but that has not happened yet. Okay, so at this point, everybody's Roman Catholic. Okay, and then as I mentioned, right, there is a very, you know, strict hierarchy set up here within the church. Obviously, at the top, you have the Pope. Okay, and then as you can see, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but as you can see, it goes on down to your basic parish priests down at the bottom of the church hierarchy. Okay, but this is still the structure. This is still the hierarchy of the Catholic Church today. Okay, there is still just one Pope, and there are about 80-something cardinals, I believe. And then obviously countless more parish priests. Okay, so it's all about hierarchy. It's all about structure. Okay, and so the Catholic Church actually has its own set of laws, what they call canon law. These are laws that all Christians, or now all Catholics, are expected to follow. If you did not follow church law or you did not follow canon law, you could be excommunicated from the church. And that was a much bigger deal then, that it would be now, okay, for many, many people. To be excommunicated means, number one, that you cannot receive communion, but also number two, that you're not going to heaven. Okay, and so this was a big deal for these people. So they very much strived, including the kings and the queens, all very much strived to follow church law. Okay, because if you were a king or if you were some kind of a royal figure, okay, maybe a lord or a lady, and you violated canon law, you would face what's called an interdiction. Okay, which basically means that your whole kingdom would be banned from receiving any of the sacraments. So if a king disobeyed church law, he put his entire kingdom at risk. Okay, and so you can see the sort of very powerful hold that the church had over these people. Okay, nobody wanted to be violating church law. Okay. And then very, very quickly, we also know, and I mentioned, that they were under constant threat of invasion from the Vikings. And so if you look at the map over here, whoops, let me go back. If you look at the map over here on the right, the red arrows represent the routes that the Vikings took, okay? You have the Muslims also invading as well, okay, from the south, but I want to focus for a minute first on the Vikings. Okay, because the Vikings are going to come out of this area over here, what's called Scandinavia, and you can see that they launch a series of different invasions, and there's one group of Vikings right here, this arrow right here, they eventually head far enough west that they end up in North America, up in Canada. They don't stay there, they leave, but they are in North America long before Christopher Columbus. Okay, now down here in the south, okay, coming out of North Africa, and you have the Muslim invaders, okay, and then over here in Eastern Europe, you have the Magyar invaders. So Western Europe is under constant threat of invasion. This is not a good time. Okay, there are constant attacks happening. Okay, so as we move on, okay, you have to realize that these invasions are pretty constant right up until the year 1000, okay? And that is typically around the year 1000, that is when we say that these invasions kind of taper off and kind of stop, okay? And that's due to a whole number of factors. One, because the Vikings have found land within Russia that they seem to like better. The Muslims become weaker. So there's a whole slew of different factors as to why these constant invasions finally end. But the important thing is when these invasions end, Europe becomes a whole lot more stable, okay? Additionally, something else that's going to happen around this time is that the climate becomes a lot warmer. Now, why is that important? Well, because it means that they can grow more. And so agriculture gets better. Okay, because the weather gets better, they're able to produce a lot more food, which means that they can sustain a larger population. And so what happens is we do have a population explosion happening in that period from 1000 to 1300. Okay, now of course, what's sort of hanging over everybody's heads is that the plague is, ultimately going to kill many of them. Okay, but we do see a period of great expansion and great growth. We also finally begin to see cities start to sprout up again, okay, and the Europeans finally begin engaging in some kind of international trade, okay? This is when the Silk Roads, okay, are going to start to become a lot more prominent, okay? And so, like I said, we do have a lot of towns growing. I'm not going to read them all off to you, but you see them right there. Obviously, London becomes the most important town at the time in Western Europe, or the most important city, excuse me. Other important cities are going to be Paris and Venice. And then probably the most important city in all of Europe at that time is going to be Constantinople. The reason Constantinople is so important is because it represents that gateway to the east, that that we've talked about, right? Constantinople is sort of that very wealthy, very intellectual gateway city between the Eastern world and the Western world. Okay, trade increases. Okay, and so you see lumber being traded, beeswax, which is used to make candles, animal furs, wine. Okay, these all become important trade goods. That, for the first time, leads to some more work for women. Okay, women can get jobs working within this blossoming trading industry. Okay, they can become weavers. They can become brewers of wine. Okay, they can work in retail. They can work in spinning, and yes, prostitution. Okay, these all become professions that women take on during the higher part of the Middle Ages. Now, what we also see happening within Europe at this time is this blending of different cultures, okay? And so you have some of the Germanic influences from the Franks, Charlemagne and the Franks, okay, combining with obviously the Roman elements, but also some Greek elements as well. One example of that would be Latin, okay? So even if you were in France, let's say, if you were educated, okay, even if you lived in France, if you were sort of an upper class, educated kind of individual, you would speak Latin, okay, because that sort of distinguished you and showed your status and showed your level of education. So those people all spoke Latin, okay. So that's one example, again, of how culture kind of blended into European culture. You know, it's an example of that Roman culture making its way into Western Europe. Okay, you do have certain scholars who are trying to reconcile their sort of beliefs about the natural world with classical Christian beliefs. Thomas Aquinas is one of those people. Okay, he writes extensively about how philosophy is still compatible with Christianity. Okay, for example. So you do have a lot of those different examples. Okay, here you can see in this painting, rather. Okay, there's kind of a lot happening. If you look to the right, you have an invasion taking place. Okay, you have trade going on over here. You have this sort of festival taking place here. Just kind of this sort of mishmash. You have this person down in the bottom right who appears to have died. So you have, just kind of a lot of different things going on. Now, this is when we're also going to see the idea of serfdom, okay, appearing. And it's mostly within Europe, but please understand that the Japanese also do it as well, okay? And so this is where the idea of manorialism comes from, living on the manor, okay? You've probably learned about this before, but basically this is where you have this large local estate, which was called a manor, okay? And that manor was extremely self-sufficient, meaning it didn't need anything that they couldn't produce on their own. And it was worked by a group of people called serfs, okay? And so manorialism is this relationship between the economy and the politics that would exist between the lords who owned all the land and their laborers who were serfs, okay? The serfs had to live on the land, so they lived on the manor, and they worked there, and they were the ones that were working that land. In exchange for that, the serfs received protection, okay? So the lords agreed to protect them, to keep them safe. Their knights protected them, and in exchange for that, the serfs basically agreed to work on the land, to work for the Lord, with the understanding that they couldn't just pack up and leave if they wanted to, okay? So this was a two-way street that was working here, okay? It starts in the latter part of the Roman Empire, but it really takes off during this medieval period in Western Europe, okay? Now, eventually, it's going to be replaced by feudalism, okay? And so feudalism replaces that. Feudalism is much less politically centralized. Feudalism also leads to a new military class of people called knights, which are going to emerge. And basically, the way that this works out is now the lords are giving some of their land to other people in exchange for loyalty. So the whole idea of feudalism is that you could receive land in exchange for your loyalty to a lord. So land for loyalty. Yes, Karina, go.
So why were they so focused on loyalty?
Because this was a very unsafe world, okay? And so given that they were under constant threat of attack, they wanted to protect themselves as best they could. And if you knew somebody was going to be loyal to you, that meant that they weren't going to try to invade you and to try to attack you and to try to take your land, okay? So it was all about self-preservation, okay? Society was all based, obviously, of course, upon agriculture, okay? You couldn't sell a serf like you could a slave. So this was not slavery, okay? But if a lord died, the serfs could be passed on to and could be inherited by their next of kin, okay? Some of the lords would provide additional protection to the less prominent or the less wealthy lords. Those kind of higher level lords were all called vassals. Okay, and then like I said, in exchange, the vassals would pay their lords in terms of military service or goods or farming goods, whatever the case happens to be. Okay, and then to a much lesser extent, you also see this in Japan. Okay, so if you look at this painting or this drawing, I guess right here, this is what feudalism would have looked like, right? So you have your lord over here, and then you have the peasants, the serfs, kind of working that land. Now, I want to clarify a very important point, which is what's the difference between manorialism and feudalism? Okay, feudalism describes what the relationship is between the king and his nobles. Manorialism describes the relationship between the nobles and the peasants. Okay, so feudalism is kind of higher up. Feudalism is the king and the nobles. Manorialism is the nobles and the peasants. Okay, and so feudalism is a political system and deals with the military, whereas manorialism is more economic. Okay, because it's again on a much more local sort of a scale. Okay, and so here's your pyramid. Here's what this would have looked like. Obviously, you have the Pope at the very top, and then just kind of underneath him, you have the king, okay? And then you see sort of like where everybody else fits in. Notice that the serfs and the peasants are down at the bottom. Now, keep in mind, the serfs and the peasants are down at the bottom, despite the fact that they are by far the largest of these groups. There's more serfs and there's more peasants than any other group, and yet they are still kind of pushed down to the bottom, okay? And so again, here's just a graphic. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but again, the way that it works, right? The king gives land to the lords. In exchange, the lords or the vassals all pledge loyalty to the king, and they provide him with military service, okay? This was what the agreement was. This was the back and forth. Now, as I mentioned before, women do have a little bit more freedom in the earlier part of this period because they are able to work in some of these different craft guilds, okay? And they did have to be paid, okay? By the time we get to the High Middle Ages, around the year 11 to 1200 or so, women get pushed out of a lot of those jobs, with the exception of spinning, okay, becoming a midwife or becoming a prostitute, okay? And so they don't have as much freedom at the end of this era as they did at the beginning, okay? So things change for them and not for the better, okay? Many of them, in fact, chose to live in a convent and become nuns, become sisters, simply because it kind of afforded them a lot more freedom than they otherwise would have if they were living on the manor, okay? So actually becoming a sister, becoming a nun was actually considered to be, something that was very much desired, okay? Also, during this time period, you start to see labor become very much split up, okay? And so you have peasant agriculture. You still have the nomads out there who are, having cows and things grazing on the land. Obviously, you have the guilds who are producing specialty goods, things like clothes and candles, Bibles and books and those sorts of things, okay? You have coerced labor and unfree labor, which are your serfs. Okay, you have government imposed labor, which is slavery, but that was at this time on a very small scale. And then you have those people who chose to serve in the military. Okay, and so the craft guilds is something new that comes during the Middle Ages. Basically, the craft guilds was a group of people who could all perform a trade, and they all got together and they agreed to kind of establish one of these different businesses in each medieval town. So each town would have a carpenter, each town would have a painter, a mason, a tanner, etc. Okay, the idea was that they all joined together to kind of work alongside each other to provide these different services within medieval towns. And what they would do is, like all the bakers who were a part of the guild, they would get together and they would set standards. So they would say, okay, we all agree we're all going to sell our bread for no more than this price and no less than this price. So they were working together to prevent anybody from kind of putting them out of business or anything like that. Okay, so these guilds become extremely important, not only because they set prices, but they also would set standards, okay? And so it's kind of, think of it like a certification kind of a thing. If you could join a guild, that meant that you had a certain level of skill, a certain level of expertise, that you were considered to be kind of like a master in your particular field, okay? And so I'm not going to read these to you, but as you can see, there's all kinds of rules and things that they followed, okay? If you broke any of the rules of the guild, you could be fined or you could be thrown out of the guild. So there were a lot of those things as well. All right, and then as we move towards the end here, the other thing that you're going to start to see happening is agriculture is going to get a whole lot better. Okay, there's going to be increased farming. The plow is going to get better. That's going to allow them to turn a lot more soil than they could have before, which is going to increase the output. Okay, they also moved towards something called the 3-field system, which is where you would rotate fields throughout the year. And basically, that meant that at any point, there was always one field that was not used. That allowed that field to regrow. It allowed the soil to kind of regrow and become a lot more fertile. All of these things led to our first agricultural revolution. Okay, and so you are seeing, as a result of the increased agricultural production, you start to see technological advances as well, like the champa rice that we talked about, like the horse collar, okay, which was actually used oftentimes on oxen, okay, because it allowed them to plow fields much more efficiently, okay. And then I think I'm going to hold off on the crusade. No, I'll do them real quick. All right, I was going to hold off until Monday, but I'll do it now. So the Crusades were a whole Christian holy war that they launched. The goal of the Crusades was to reclaim this land that you see on the map here that's in orange, okay? They wanted to reclaim the Holy Land in the name of Christianity. That was the goal, okay? This sort of purple area here represented lands that were held by the Christians, but as you notice, the Christians did not hold this area over here, which was very important to them because that's what's called the Holy Land, right? And so in particular, Jerusalem was the land that they wanted, okay? That was where Jesus lived. That was where Jesus walked. That was land that they really wanted to reclaim. And so they launched a whole series of different wars to try to get that territory back. And each war was called a crusade. Now, there were many, many crusades. There were 4 that were the most prominent, but there were many different crusades, and all of them were unsuccessful except the first one. And the first one actually was only temporarily successful. They do briefly reclaim Jerusalem, but they do ultimately lose it again. Okay, so only the first crusade was remotely successful. The other ones were all massive, massive failures. Okay, they thought of crusading as an expansion. Okay, and so they wanted to expand their land into territories that the Byzantines held. Okay, now one of the things that the Crusades do lead to is contact with the East. And so when we talk about how trade really begins to pick up, one of the reasons that trade with the Far East, with the Indians, with the Chinese, with the Mongols, one of the reasons that trade really begins to pick up is because of the Crusades and because of the contact that would happen, okay? And so that's sort of this kind of connection here, that the Crusades push Western Europe into the East a little bit and sort of increases contact with them, okay? All right, so a couple of other things about the Crusades really, really quickly, right? I did say that they believed that they were holy wars, okay? If you participated in a crusade and you were a Christian and you served valiantly, the Pope gave you what was called an indulgence. An indulgence basically means that you were forgiven and you did not have any penalties for any sins that you would confess. Okay, so it was basically a ticket into heaven for these Christians who would go on to crusade. Okay, they felt like they were fighting this holy war against the Muslims. They were going to, again, reclaim Jerusalem. Okay, but by 1291, the Muslims have pushed the Christians out and they reclaim all of the territory that they lost, including Jerusalem. And this is why I was saying to you that it's only the first crusade that is remotely successful, okay? This also demonstrates, the whole crusading era demonstrates for us, I think, just how ruthless the Western Europeans could be, because the Crusades did involve the slaughter and the killing of not only Muslims, but also Jews as well. Okay, and so there wasn't really any kind of a long-lasting impact because they lost, okay? There wasn't really a whole lot of change taking place, again, because they weren't there long enough. They didn't convert a lot of people, okay? What was more significant is that they moved into the Byzantine Empire and made contact with the Mongols. That had significantly more consequences for Europe in terms of trade, okay? Spain, for the first time, does become permanently Christian, as does the Baltics and then the island of Sicily. Okay, the Byzantine Empire gets weakened as a result of this. Constantinople, unfortunately, becomes destroyed during this time period. Okay, and then probably the biggest consequence for the Europeans is that contact with the East when they develop a taste for those Asian luxury goods. That's going to lead to what we're going to talk about when we get into Unit 2 next week. That's going to lead to things like the Silk Roads, okay, and establishing these sort of permanent trade routes with the East, with the Easterners, particularly with the Chinese and the Mongols. Okay, the Europeans learn how to make sugar. Sugar becomes a very important part of the European diet. Okay, and they do learn some ideas and some things from the Muslims. So some of those Muslim science ideas, okay, do make their way in, as well as, again, we do see some trade. But then our final lasting effect, and the last thing that I want to mention, of course, is that we do see this gap widening between the Eastern Catholic Church and the Western Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, to the point where in just a couple hundred years, there's going to be a permanent schism that's going to divide Christianity. So you're going to have Eastern Orthodox Christians on one hand, and then on the other side, you're going to have the Roman Catholics, okay? And that's because that Byzantine world and that Eastern world didn't really appreciate the way that they were treated during this crusading period. So that kind of conflict between them widens to the point where eventually there's going to be a schism, okay? All right, so that brings us to the end. Before I log off of the call, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? Any questions at all? No? Okay, so later this afternoon, I'll be posting all of that revised information about exams. I will post that new rubric for you, and I'll get you all of that information. Just remember that your yes, Karina. Oh no, you're just waiting. Just remember that those assignments are due Sunday evening. I'll be checking them beginning on Monday. So please try to keep up with those. Next week we'll have a different set of assignments. Other than that, it's been an interesting first week with this. This is not how I would have preferred it, but it is what it is. I think we're getting better and better at this every day. And so I do hope you enjoy your weekend to the extent that you can. I know we can't really go anywhere, but hopefully you can enjoy the weekend, relax a little bit. And if you have any questions, I will have my office hours again today from 1:30 until 4, so you can reach me there. If you have any questions over the weekend, message me on Remind. I probably won't be on Teams, but I will have my Remind, so you can message me there. Otherwise, have a great weekend, everybody, and I will see you guys on Monday.
Do the whoa.
What?
Do the whoa. Do the whoa.
The what?
The whoa.
The whoa? What does that mean?
It's like, yeah, look what Jan did.
Do it
No,
again.
don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, because he has invisible arms.
Oh, hell no.
Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
weekend, everybody. I will see you Monday.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.